Hey everybody, welcome back to Creating Scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of many of the menus that at least I use in the SDK inside the sim. I think a lot of you know that I use Notepad++ to do a lot of my folder project setup outside of the sim, and then I use inside the sim to do the actual scenery creation and bringing in the models and things like that. I think everybody understands, at least by now, that's the way I do it. But I'm going to give you an overview of some of the menus in the SDK so you can get familiar with them. A lot of the menus I don't use. And then the next video, I'll show you how to create a project inside the sim. Okay. And then I'll show you the results of creating one inside the sim by looking at the XMLs that it creates on the outside, if that makes sense. All right. So this video gives an overview of some of the menus, at least that I use, and gives you a kind of a feel of the environment. All right. So I hope you guys find that this video is useful. And hopefully you'll subscribe and share and like and hit the notification bells and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's get started. Okay, we're in the sim. I have the project editor open by going to Tools, Project Editor, and open it. And this is basically how mine comes up by default. But I have the project editor over here. Okay, the project editor is where you load your initial project. All right, so once you go to the project editor, you're going to go to project. I'm going to close this for now, but this is how it comes up. Project editor, then you'll go to project, you'll open your project. And I'm not going to talk about creating a new project yet, but you'll select the project XML that you're working on, and you'll open that in the project editor. And then over here, you'll have the name of your project, and then the different assets that you want to load into the SDK. If you're working on your scenery, you'll open the Bugle or BGL file, whatever, and you'll select that, and then you'll load in editor from the inspector menu. All right, so I'm going to minimize this for a second. So let's look here. You have your build all, clean all, build and export. All right, I don't really use build all and clean all that much, but we'll talk about those at another time. But the project menu, you can create a new project, and this is where you basically create the folder structure and the XMLs of your project from inside the SDK without using a text editor outside. Okay, and we'll talk about that in another video, obviously, because that's what this series, that's what this video is about. Or you can open a current project, or you can open any project that you've had in the past open. And then once you have a project open, you can do the save or a save as and close. Okay. The Show and Explorer, if you click on that, it basically just opens your Window Explorer so you can see inside the folders. That's all that does. All right. Now this FS package by default is not going to be in your project folder. This is the executable that I run outside of the sim when I build my projects outside of the sim. And this is just copied over from, I have a folder that I keep the SDK samples and stuff in. And you get, and I usually copy this from the tools bin folder, and I'll copy that executable inside my package, inside my project folder, not my packages folder. Okay, so each one of my projects has a copy of this very small footprint executable that I use to build outside of the sim. The add or rename filters, the filter stuff, I don't use very often. I'll explain those at another time. And the build and export, mainly when you build your project and you want to export it to, just like the prompt says, to the marketplace. I usually don't build and export. Build all, rebuild all, and clean all are just maintenance activities on your project. And I don't, to be honest with you, I've never had to use a build all, rebuild, or clean. Maybe because I do most of my project creations outside of the sim, that I usually clean that stuff up by hand. All right. But it will get rid of files and stuff that you don't need and all that kind of stuff. That's basically what all this activity does. The edit, Control Z and Control Y for undo and all that. Now your view, for instance, the view, notice that inspector's checked. If I check that, that inspector window goes away, so you can get to the inspector by going to the project editor, hitting view, click on inspector. Okay, and then that brings up this menu, which we'll talk about soon. All right. If you're going to add a package or remove a package, it's these buttons down here on the bottom, which is self-explanatory really. But if I clicked add a package, I can add in a new customized package or a visual effect or an airport or something like that. And then if you inadvertently create one and you want to remove it, that's what the remove packages does. Now let's talk about the inspector. All right, I'm going to slide that over here so I got a good view of it. All right. So in the inspector, this is where you basically add your assets and build your project and all that kind of stuff. Actually, we don't have the build button because it dropped to it's all the way down at the bottom. And if you ever want to resize your menus, you have this little box in the lower right hand corner so you can drag those and resize your windows. You can just hover on any boundary of the menu box and resize it according to how you want it. So in the inspector, you got some filters that you can play with. I haven't had the need to mess with filters, but you can, and I'll explain those later on. Okay. But in the summary content manager, you have where you put the version of your project. So if this was the first version, you would put a 1. For example, 1.0.0. Okay, if you're making an incremental update, 1.1. If you have a bug fix, 1.1.1. Okay, and if you have a new version, change that to 2. You guys understand that. Okay, the name of your project. All right, this is 5 Alpha 1, my guinea pig airport that I have. And obviously, I just give it a 5 Alpha 1. And in the package name, the 5 Alpha 1 for the company. All right, for the package name, I have HUR, which is short for Huron County, Ohio. All right, so these two spaces are important when you create a package. because both of these need to be populated, because the new SDK requirements, package names have to be word dash word dash word blah blah blah, etc., etc. It used to be that you can just make it one word, my airport, or well, not that generic, but some name could have been, Christopher's Airport, okay? And then it would build just fine. But you can't do that anymore. You have to have more than one word. So I usually put the ICAO code, and then some identifier in the next one. All right. And then if you're doing like an aircraft or something like that, you would put in the manufacturer. Title, this could be anything that you want. And creator could be your name or your company. And in this case, it's a scenery. But the inspector is where you name your package, okay? And if you have an image, a thumbnail, you can put it into the contents info folder, but it has to be particularly this size, a 412 by 170 image, just a small JPEG, okay? And then I don't do anything to the marketplace, so I never use add marketplace data. All my stuff is free that I do on flightsim.to, so I never use the add marketplace data. Some of you guys that want to try to make money with your scenery, you'll have to explore this a little bit more. Now, assets groups. Remember, when you've seen me use Notepad++ to add an asset, I'll type in a bunch of XML tags and fill out the information in the text editor. Anytime that you add an asset group to a scenery file, it automatically adds that asset group tag to your XML, and that's what this part of the inspector does. So if I wanted to add an asset group, I can like if I was at an airport or some type of visual effect or something custom, I would just click on the obvious choice and go in and edit that particular data, and we'll talk about that later. So that's how you add an asset group, okay? Now, if you have an asset group that you want to edit, obviously there's an edit button. So you can click the edit next to the asset group that you want to edit, and you get the edit screen. And the edit screen is where you put your paths to the source material, package sources, and the output folder for the actual package. And this is where, in this particular case for materials, I want my materials to be a unique name. Okay, if this just said materials, which is the default, or my materials, which is the default, this could cause conflicts with other people's scenery. So that's why you want to have your assets being uniquely named. So here I have a 5 alpha 1 dash materials. All right, for the output directory. The import directory for the materials is not all that important. This could say materials, all right, because the output is what's going to be written to the actual package, all right. The input is just where it's getting the information from your hard drive, all right. So that's what this means. Okay, so if I want to close this out, I just hit the X, and then if I come back to the top and then view inspector, it takes it back to the original place. That's the blue project name. All right, but if I go into the model lib, it only brings the inspector stuff for whatever I have selected over here. All right, so for the model lib, I have my model lib uniquely named 5alpha1 model lib. Now you notice that the output directory says scenery my company, which is the default. You can rename this if you want to, but unlike the material, the material lib, where it uniquely names the output file, with a model lib, it's a little different because it will name the output, even though it says scenery, my company. The model lib will actually be 5alpha1-model lib. I know that's kind of weird, but that's how it works. You would think it would be the same, that it would do the output, but you can rename the output. And then the scene, same thing. You have the package sources, okay, and you have the output. Then going back to the main inspector, and then at the bottom of the inspector panel is where you, if you make a change and you're getting ready to build your package, that's where you click the build package. Or if you need to clean it up, do some editing. Like I said, I have hardly ever cleaned my packages because I do it outside of the sim by hand. So I've never really had to clean a package, to be honest with you. Now, organizing your menus, that's totally up to you. I see a lot of people that minimize a lot of stuff like this and just put these little menus like organized kind of like this, so you get more screen, and then when you need a certain menu you just expand it like this, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll be honest with you, I kind of like that every once in a while. That way you see more of your scenery and you don't have all of these menus. Okay, now the one thing that you have to understand about these menus is, okay, they have hard docks. If I grab the menu and notice that these little blue boxes show up, that tells you where on the screen it's going to dock that menu. All right, notice that we have this blue ghost. That means if I release my mouse button, it's going to take up that much space on my screen. Okay, now sometimes you're going to see a menu that you can't see through. Okay, it's not a ghost. If it's opaque like this, then if there's anything underneath that menu, you can't click on it. All right, you can't select it. All right, but if it's a ghost like this, then you can usually drag things underneath the menu and not affect it. All right, so if you're clicking things on your menus and they're not working, it's probably because it's opaque like this. All right, your goal is to have it in a ghost image. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize the inspector, and I am going to go into my scene. Oh, actually, I need my inspector. Sorry. I'm going to go into my scene, and I'm going to load in the editor. All right, so there's my scenery. I don't have much scenery in this particular project. This is just my guinea pig. All right. Since we've opened this project, this BGL in the editor, you get the scenery editor menu show up. Okay. And you can expand these windows the same, or you can undock them. See how this is opaque now? Okay, because it's not docked. But you can resize that window. The scenery editor is all of the objects that you have in your scene. Okay, so in this particular airport, I don't have much. All right, I just have the boundary of the airport, and I have one little apron right here that I use to test things. And you notice that it has a polygon, which is this polygon out here, and it says no tin, no buildings, no vegetation. All right, that's my airport boundary. And then inside of 5 alpha 1, I have one apron, which is that little box right there. All right, so the scenery editor shows you all of the different objects that you have in your scene, and then you can get to those by clicking the appropriate. All right, now if you wanted to look at the properties of an object, just right click and open up the properties menu, and then you can actually give your objects a name. So I can whoops, what happened here? Let's properties, there we go. Let's come over here, click inside there, and I can put test apron. And then anytime that you type in one of these menus, you have to hit enter to finalize. All right, now the asterisk, a lot of people see these asterisks and they're wondering what the asterisk is because the scenery has not been saved or clean or built. That's what that means. It's been newly added. You'll need to save and build your project for that to go away. So we have in the scenery editor, we have all the objects that are in our scene. That's what it is. So if you have an airport, you'll see it'll say airport. All that kind of stuff shows up in this screen. Now in the scenery editor, you have an edit menu. You have undo and redo. I always use just Control Z or Control Y to undo. If I've made a mistake, I'll just Control Z. All right, and then you have some options that you can work with in terms of viewing only the current package, selected of locked objects, and save polygons to shapefile. Now, the new build process, there is no longer a shapefile. All your polygons actually get written to the scenery XML now. So there is no longer a shapefile. But you can save them to a shapefile, but I don't know why you would anymore. And then you can show some debug. In the view menu of the scenery editor, you can look at history of anything that you undone in your scene. The view objects, these are submenus that show up. So here I have an objects menu checked, and if you look over here, I have an objects window now, or an objects menu. All right, so you can resize that kind of stuff and minimize that. All right, so if I go view and turn off objects, that menu goes away. But if I go view objects, it shows back up in the last state that it was. So I'd have this little banner. Okay, same for viewing properties. Importer from APX, to be honest with you, I have no clue what that is. I've never used it. Color extractor. The other most important view for the scenery editor is going to be the gizmo, and that's right up here, which allows you to translate your objects, which means move back, forward, left, right, up, and down. So you can move in all three of the axes. You can rotate your objects by using the widget here to rotate your object on specific axis, or you can actually change the scale of the object. All right, so that's what the gizmo allows you to do. All right, and you can be precise with latitude and longitude, pitch and angle and heading and all that kind of stuff. All right, so that's what view gizmo does. If I change the state of the gizmo and then I go to view, uncheck gizmo, it goes away. If I go to the scenery editor, view gizmo, it comes up in the last saved state of the menu. So now rendering. Rendering will put labels on your screen. So if I want to show airport name, I see airport and then parentheses. All right. I don't have a name. I don't have an airport name on it. That's why it says that. But you can turn it off. But if you have any taxiway names, I don't have any taxiways on this airport. But if I click that, I would see for every line segment that makes up taxiways, it'll have whatever you call it, such as A, Bravo, Charlie, Echo, etc. Okay? And the same way with taxiway widths. And then if you have any parking spaces in your airport and you click parking spaces, it will show a labeled text with the name of that parking space. So that's what the rendering menu does. Now, also inside the scenery editor, you notice that you have a delete and duplicate. Okay, and you have a create a new group. You can group your objects. You can move selections to different groups. You can move them up and down the tree. You can click an object and rename, which is the same as me opening up the properties of that apron and typing in the name. And you can do that if you wanted to. And down here at the bottom, let me show you an example here. Let's select the test. Let's select the test, and let's zoom into. I have to hit F to go down. Okay. So if I selected the test apron and I hit duplicate, now I have two. Now they're one on top of the other. But I can use the translate, which I'm already set on translate, and I can grab the handle and I can move that apron in one of these axes, just like this. Okay, so now I have two copies of the same apron. Now your new duplicates always say copy, so you can actually select that apron that you just duplicated, and you can rename that, and you can call it whatever you want. So I can backspace and put, like, apron number 2, or give it a specific name and hit OK, and it renames it in your scenery editor parameters. Okay, so that's what. And if I didn't want it, see how it's selected now, and I have it selected here. If I hit the delete, it's no longer in the project. So that's simply what delete and duplicate does. Now, if I had a whole bunch of aprons, and let's say that let's say I had a whole bunch of aprons here that make up this particular large apron. And let's say this was a facility for cargo or something like that. I can select every one of the aprons that make this area up. Let's say they have different textures. Let's say that this is concrete, and then let's say I select this apron and I duplicate it and I move it over here. I move it in this axis and I have another one. But let's say I apply two different materials to it. That's why I would have multiple polygons for the same apron, because maybe the surface changed. Let's say they resurfaced this part of the apron and it's different than this over here. I can still select both of these and I can simply create a new group by just clicking the Create New Group. And both of these aprons are inside that group now. And then I can go to the group and rename the group to Cargo Apron or something like that. Okay? And then hit OK. Now, Cargo Apron is made up of Test Apron and Test Apron Copy. So that's how you can group your objects in your scenery. Now, obviously, after you make a change on this menu system here, after you make a change in your scenery, you're going to want to save it. So you simply click the Save Scenery button. Now, this is a guinea pig airport, so I'm not going to save it, but when you click Save, the Save button turns green if it works correctly. All right? So anytime that you make an edit, go ahead and save your scenery, and it writes it to disk. That way you don't lose that change that you've made. And then anytime that you save your scenery, at the end of your session, when you're getting ready to leave, you're going to need to rebuild your package. Let's go back to the scenery editor view again. There's a couple things in here that I have never really had to use. Okay, I've never had to use the color extractor or importer from APX. I've never had to use those. I've never had to use the object finder either. Okay, but if you hit the object finder, if you know a GUID, if you know the GUID, remember the GUID is the unique identifier of every object that's in your scene, but you can do a search on a GUID. All right, but these are very complex alphanumeric numbers, identifiers, so that's why I've never actually had to find by a GUID, and it would just be a pain in the butt, in my opinion. But that's what Object Finder does. Now, the other thing to understand about anytime that you have the scenery editor open, it will also open up the material editor for that particular asset group. Okay, so here I have the material, and it's docked with the inspector, but I can undock it if I want to, and then I can minimize that and leave that as a separate window case. All right, so I have my inspector all by itself, I have my material editor by itself. All right, so let's expand the material editor, and you'll notice that we have all of the materials that I have available to me, and these are all of these are based on any scenery that I have in my community folder, or the default folder for Asobo. Okay, notice that I have an MPW MCMH materials, which is my Columbus, Ohio John Glenn International Airport scenery that I developed. Since that's in my community folder, I can use any one of the textures or materials that are in that in my 5 Alpha 1 project. All right, so anything that you have in your community folder, you have available to you in the material editor. But if I only wanted to specifically use materials in my 5 Alpha 1, I need to, in the material editor menu, I need to select the actual materials that I want in this project. And now that they're available, I click on the project, and only those particular materials that I have in that library show up in this list. Now if I do all, it shows everything that's in my community folder plus all of the Asobo default materials. Okay? And then user is the same as your open project. All right. So if I go to all and I want to look at the materials that are available to me, I'll come up to bitmap preview, and then if I hover over the material, it shows me what it looks like. Okay. And remember, like paint markings on the ground, they're always backwards. You make those backwards in your graphics software, such as Krita. Okay, like so words are always backwards. That's why they show up backwards in the preview. All right, but when you lay them on the pavement, okay, they'll be correct. Now, some of these menus you've seen in some of my previous videos. So if you wanted to add materials, you would do a file new, or if there was a material you didn't want, you'll select the material and delete it. View, that's the same as seeing the bitmap manager or the actual material editor inspector itself. And then debug, you can clean and unused textures, do some diagnostics, and redo flags. Flags, when you add a material to your material folder, such as a PNG file, when you add it to the material library, when you enable it into the actual material library, okay, it gets a file, a new file written to the folder that says .flags. Okay, this tells the simulator that that's ready for use. All right. So these are the basic menus that you're going to find in the SDK. So we're going to come up to the dev mode menus and show you a couple things. If you look at tools, obviously, if you check project editor, everything that you're working with, actually this menu right here shows up. And then your scenery editor, you can turn your scenery editor off. Okay, now since I've made changes, it wants to know if I want to save before closing. In my particular case for this video, I'm not saving anything. All right, but that closes the scenery editor and returns it back to the simulator view. But if I come back and I turn back on scenery editor, it opens up the scenery editor, but my project is no longer loaded inside of it. Okay, I would have to go to the project editor and select the scene, select the asset, and I would have to come over to the inspector again and reload it into the sim. Let's come over, let's look at some other things. You can show the material editor, the script editor. Script editor, I believe, is used for sim objects, that kind of stuff. Air traffic editor. I don't do anything with the air traffic or the aircraft editor. I am not a aircraft designer, so that's why I don't use all these. So you people that do aircraft, you'll know more about this stuff than I will. And then you have some other aircraft related stuff. All right. Now, virtual file systems, as you select on that, package folders. All right, you get some you get some information about your virtual file system. Okay, so here are all the virtual file systems for the project. Okay, packages, screenshots. You can do screenshots. Now let's go to camera. I'm in developer camera right now. That's what this view is. All right, or you can do a top down, which is straight down on your scenery. So if you ever want to get to a planimetric view of your airport, you can simply go to the camera, do the top down. All right, if I uncheck that, it takes me back to the airplane or where you start in the sim. And if I go to camera, go to developer camera, that comes out here where you use the left alt key and your mouse buttons to move around. Okay. I hardly ever use slew mode, but for instance, I've used slew mode before where a particular scenery was nowhere near an airport and I had to use slew mode to actually start at an airport and then use slew to actually get to the location where the scenery object was going to be inserted. Okay, and then you have some camera settings, all right, such as the translation speed, how fast forward, up and down you want to go, how fast you want to spin it, that kind of stuff. Now, under options, you're going to see all different buttons. Some of them I'll talk about, some of them I won't. I don't use them all the time, but the basics of the options menu is you can simply pause the sim if you wanted to. Okay. Or you can resume the sim. Disable crashes, which I always have when I'm doing dev mode, because if I have crashes enabled and I actually move something and it causes my airplane to crash, it will shut my session down. Local time, here's a slider that you can easily change the time of day. If you wanted a quick look, you can do it here, or you can actually go up to the environmental settings of the sim and change the timing and the clouds and all that kind of stuff. But this only changes the time. And then if you wanted to show icing, that kind of stuff, windshield rain, you can override the rate and all that kind of stuff. You can display your frame rates. Most of you simmers are already familiar with this because you look at the performance of your sim ground. And let's take a look at our ISO lines, added altitude ISO lines, and that shows you a view of how flat your airport is. Actually, all of the ground. Okay, so here's the airport for 5 Alpha 1, and I have altitude ISO lines, which are lines of equal elevation. So it's kind of like a topographic map. And if you're going to flatten your airport, so here this airport has some inclines and stuff. If you wanted to flatten it, you can use the altitude ISO lines to see how flat a region is. So all of this inside this polygon is relative the same elevation. Okay, so these are all ISO lines. All right, lines of equal elevation, and you get that through the ground menu altitude ISO lines. So you have a bunch of other tools in here, debug your vegetation. Some of the stuff, to be honest with you, I don't understand because I never use it, but that's okay. You're going to use the SDK that's applicable to the work that you do. You can look at wireframe versions of all of your models under the options. I do use debug model LODs. And the reason I do that is when I'm testing my levels of detail, I can see the characteristics of the objects and their current LOD being viewed. So notice as you zoom in, these numbers change. Okay, so this would be LOD 0. This would be LOD 1. There's LOD 2. It's the distance away from the object. So there's 4 LODs for that particular object. Alright, currently it's using LOD 2 to view this building. And as I zoom in, now it's using LOD 1 to look at this building. And then if I keep zooming in, then it would change to LOD 0, which is the highest detailed version. Okay, so that's looking at this building right here in the model. And that's what the debug LODs does. It helps you to determine the setting for the level of detail. And I talk about this in another video. Then you have the Windows menu in the dev mode. I only use really the console. So if I'm getting ready to build a project, I'll clear out the console, close the console out, do my build, and then only errors associated with that build session show up in the console. So the console reports errors, warnings, and messages about the sim. Now if I just left this for a while and I zoomed into the airport, it'd start drawing things, and if the sim was having errors or warnings, now the sim has a lot of errors that show up that aren't detrimental to what you're doing. That's why every time I build a project, I clean out the console so only the errors related to my build show up. Okay, but there might be some default textures or default animations that fail. They'll show up in this console, but they have no bearing on your scenery. I hope that makes sense to you. But that's what the console window does. It gives you information about the current session that you're working with. Then finally, we're going to look at the help menu. This is where you go if you're going to download. You'll notice up in the right hand corner it says SDK updates. Alright, if it's blue like this and says SDK updates, you really don't have any SDK updates, even though that says updates. If there is a new SDK available for download, SDK updates will say SDK updates available, and this will be yellow. Okay, and if that is yellow up there, then you'll come to the help, go to SDK installer, and it opens up your browser and downloads the latest SDK to your drive. It doesn't install it on your system. It just downloads the installer. Then you would go to your File Explorer, your Windows Explorer, and you'll run that MSI, and that will install the SDK. Same with the documentation. It downloads the installer for the SDK documentation. Then, if you wanted to download samples, and if you wanted to look at some tutorial videos that Asobo has created, you do that here as well. So that explains the help menu on the dev mode. So I hope this video helped show some things about the menu system. I kind of wish I did aircraft so I can show you a little bit more about those kind of menus, but I am not that smart like you aircraft developers are. So I'll leave those videos to you guys because you're smarter than I am. Scenery doesn't take as scenery doesn't take as much smarts, I guess. I don't know. No, it does. You guys are brilliant. Some of your scenery is unbelievable. I can only aspire to be as good as you guys. So I hope this video kind of lays out some of the menus for you, and I will see you guys on the next video, and you guys have a fantastic day, weekend, or week, or whatever it ends up being. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.